You go. Thank you. All right. So welcome, Lisa. Why don't you go ahead and mute everybody except for myself, Brandon, and Roy. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Prometis Partners Owner Fireside Chat, a monthly owner roundtable that discusses issues and opportunities for business owners to not only continue to build value in their business, but also look at how they can be more successful in their transition. What we look for at Prometis Partners is to help businesses align their qualitative assets with their quantitative assets so they can make better decisions and move forward inside of their business. So today we have two great panelists with us today to talk about ESOPs. This is a growing and very hot topic with a lot of businesses. Not only is it a great strategy for transitioning out of your business, but it's also a great strategy to build value inside the business and bring people together that are there and kind of collectively have them quasi have ownership inside the business. And there's some great things that we are going to be discussing today that I think will certainly help everybody have a little bit more information. We do have down at the bottom of the Zoom meeting a chat box. So if you have questions along the way, we have everybody muted. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we ask the panelists the questions and make sure that those get out. Another thing that's important to know is that we are recording this Zoom meeting and this topic, and it will be posted on our Prometis Partners YouTube channel. So if at a later point you want to come back and go through parts of it or all of it or share it with your group, you certainly will be able to do so through the YouTube. So it should be up here probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. So with that said, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Lisa. Let me introduce to you the panelists that we have that we're going to be talking to today. Brandon Finney and Roy Messing. Brandon is with Vision ESOP Valuation. He has been performing valuations since 2005, and he is out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then Roy Messing is the director of the State Center of Operations in the Central Michigan area, Mount Pleasant area. And Roy has also some extensive work in implementing ESOPs and educating business owners also. So gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules to be here to share some information. Thanks again.
Happy to do it.
So let's get everything started off here. I think we have a poll question, right, Lisa? We're going to ask everybody a poll question. If you could just take a minute to answer the poll question.
Oh, shoot. It's actually supposed to be ESOP.
Yep. It's okay. Okay. All right, so many of you have had some involvement with a third-party sale. We just wanted to kind of have an idea of who actually was, who has had some experience with selling a business, transitioning, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead to the next question. Next slide. Okay, so I guess the question is that we want to start off with, is now a good time to consider an ESOP for your business, right? Let's take a look at some of the questions that we have that we've asked ourselves and other business owners, right? Certainly, ESOPs have the ability to outperform conventional companies during challenging periods. So, Roy, I'm going to ask you a question off the top that's pretty straightforward. It's like, why would a business consider an ESOP for their company?
Well, I think especially if we're looking at an owner who's looking to retire, in the next 5 years, it is one of those options to consider to really get a feel for, does this type of structure benefit me? There's potential tax benefits. There's potential benefits to engaging your employees, retaining your employees over a longer period of time. And then probably a big thing that we see with people is the legacy factor. There's no son or daughter involved in the business, no apparent heirs, but they want the business to continue going forward. They can stay engaged for a period of time. And this is a great way to keep the business local if other options don't appear to be available.
Yeah, there seems to be a huge increase in ESOP, certainly and in performance. I think the annual sales growth post ESOP is about 2.5% above non-ESOP companies. Would you say that's kind of in line, Roy, with what's going on?
Yeah, I think studies out there show that there's an increase in performance, increase in sales. And usually this comes along with not only getting the employees engaged from a ownership standpoint, but helping to educate them so they understand their actions and how they impact the bottom line. If they have a better understanding of that, and they know long term it's going to benefit them if the company does better, then they move forward accordingly. So it's a combination of that ownership and the culture and education that helps achieve or helps drive a better performance.
Yeah. Brandon, on your side with the valuation, because you're working with the trustees and you're looking at the valuation on an annual basis, have you found that the communication and just the overall view of the business is certainly on a much higher level than, say, if you're not in an ESOP program?
Yeah, I think in communication is a very important part of an ESOP, because a lot of times the employees might not understand what it is or what it means to them, certainly initially. Once they start to get some of those annual statements and see that they're building value in their account, it does it creates another level of stickiness with employees and motivation to get them they want to grow the business, improve the business. They start to think about the money that the company is spending, where a lot of times they might not be as interested in what they're costing the company. And as your bullet point highlights there, during challenging periods, we're kind of in one of those in a lot of different ways right now. And one of those is labor. And a lot of the conversations we're having with companies that are looking at doing an ESOP are talking a lot about how they view an ESOP as a leg up against their competitors in recruiting new employees or retaining their existing employees.
Yeah, I would suspect that would be a large one, because it is all about, certainly keeping that great talent inside of a company and not have the employees hopping from one job to the next just because of from an income perspective, and showing value and the other benefits there that really create value for them and kind of a sense of continuity amongst everybody. So I think that's great. That's a great point that you make there. Let's go to the next bullet there, Lisa. So because employees are co-owners, they're more likely to find ways to boost sales and trim costs in a downturn. Brandon, you probably have this a lot in your valuations. Have you seen a lot of costs being trimmed and what you see from the valuation side?
I don't know that we directly see the big changes in expenses. I think just over time, you get a little bit of gradual improvement in the profitability of the business, and that's driven both by top line growth, as well as just that consciousness of if I can monitor what the company is spending or monitor my contributions to those efforts, we hope to see that in positive changes to the company's value. Yeah.
Roy, do you have any experience in this area here where employees certainly they're acting a little bit more like an owner, in a sense, is they're not taking the risk, but they're saying, hey, look at, let's make sure the lights are off. Let's make sure we're not wasting energy, because everything saves money across the board, which helps us with our share price every year, which helps the stock go up, right? Is that kind of what some of your experience?
Yeah, I think going back to the Great Recession, saw a lot of that during the Great Recession, where employees are engaged. They're more likely to come forward with ideas that will be, generating some cost savings. Hey, we really don't need to, do this trip. We don't need to do different things. I have heard that even right now, people are, more conscientious about their trips. Marketing continues, but taking trips to maybe meet clients, they find ways to minimize some of those extra costs that can help be driven to the bottom line rather quickly. So it's not just trips, it's what sort of activity they have in the shop with what they're doing. If they're aware of how they impact the bottom line and they're engaged, then they're much more likely to come forward with those ideas and find ways to benefit the company.
Right, that is correct. And then when we're looking at, in contrast to a sale to a strategic or financial buyer, certainly selling to an ESOP offers great confidentiality and certainty, certainly of being close to each other. So I think that's always another thing that people need to take into consideration. So let's go to the next bullet, Lisa. And ESOPs helps with intergenerational wealth planning. Roy, why don't you help the listeners here today who are attending, what type of wealth planning and transition have you seen if there is a family business going from one generation to the next with ESOPs?
It's been across the board. I think the whole exit planning industry has improved over the last 10 years. But what we have seen, what we've seen in the past, I think is, there wasn't a great deal of planning. And so there are a lot of gaps in between. Now with the, more robust exit planning, can work through that and determine, what's a good way to transition, especially if there's, the primary business owner is involved, but the family isn't involved so much in the business. This is a great way to transition that business over time, take some payments over time, plan through what's going to happen. And an ESOP provides a lot more flexibility than a one-time sale where you would just have, or can provide a lot more flexibility than a one-time sale where you just sell it all and the consequences are the consequences. So it's something that we could see where you could still have family involved in the ESOP as long as there's planning taking place. You should still continue ownership. Within the ESOP, you don't have to have 100% employee-owned company. So you can, as long as you're out in front of it and you're making those plans, you can be quite flexible in how that's addressed and how you transfer that wealth to the next generation.
Awesome, great, thanks, good points. Let's go to the next point, Lisa. Establishing an ESOP creates a few changes from governance or reporting. I would think that would be pretty much in line with everything that both of you guys have seen. Is that about right? I mean, it doesn't really change everything about the governance of the company. Certainly, we want to have some really good leadership that we have, below the owner level, and have a pretty well-established leadership team in place. And we certainly want to have a very productive culture. But you really haven't seen much in this area being changed, have you?
I think the only thing that's really within the ESOP, and it depends on how engaged, the ESOP is in the activity, but not only are you concerned about IRS, but, the Department of Labor comes to be involved. So you just have to make sure that you're managing everything surrounding that ESOP appropriately. There's a plan that drives the ESOP that's determined up front, can be changed over time, but that plan is set in place up front. And you just have to make sure you're managing that piece. And then you're managing cash flow. The other little quirk with an ESOP is you have to you're required to repurchase those shares from the employees as they retire. So there's a little more planning in place. And you have to think through that from how are you going to repay that debt. And you want to make sure as you're governing the company where you're setting the direction, you're taking all these variables into account.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Next bullet,
at the
Lisa.
end of the
Go
day,
ahead.
it is.
Go ahead, Brandon.
It's a retirement plan, so it needs to be administered and follow certain compliance. But like a 401k, you have to monitor and administer that plan, and it's really no different with an ESOP. There's a few different nuances and steps that are involved, but nothing that would overwhelming to anybody.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, next bullet, please. Okay, so and then the last bullet is the rationale for considering an ESOP may well prove more urgent ahead of lawmaker considerations for certain some economic stimulus and changes. Certainly there's a lot of talk about the tax code changing, increased in sales brackets, tax brackets, and whatnot, which could make an ESOP even more attractive. Capital gain rates going up to, I think, about 25 or 27%. So either one of you want to comment on that piece of it?
Yeah, I think there are some changes out there. I wouldn't say that there's an urgency, because with if you structure the ESOP a certain way, you can effectively defer those gains. So it doesn't matter what the rate is if you're not having to recognize them. There are some things that, extra steps on the structure that you have to do. There's an IRS election. So there's some things involved with doing that, but you can effectively defer the gains on the sale of the business with an ESOP. And so we expect that ESOPs will continue to be popular with higher capital gains rates. But I wouldn't say that it's something that people have to get done this year, certainly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it really wouldn't matter now, would it? Because based on what I've read in the Wall Street Journal and other publications, they would be going back to around September 15th for the tax changes. So it really wouldn't be beneficial one way or the other, because we're past that date anyway, and it would be applicable, right? So let's talk a little bit. We talked a little bit about why business owners want to do it. We talked a little bit about valuation. Brandon, can you talk a little bit, certainly with the valuation, what are some of the challenges that you see on an annual basis with the updated valuation that are required with an ESOP that you see companies struggling with potentially from time to time?
Yeah, the valuation itself, the process is the same as really any business. Obviously, we've got the ESOP and its benefits in there, but it's not that much different from a traditional valuation. So we see the same challenges that any company might face. And lately that's been the challenges resulting from COVID. Some have thrived during COVID, depending on what business they're in. But labor challenges have been ongoing concerns. We've seen a lot of companies are doing well. Construction continues to do well. There are supply chain issues. So a lot of the main things that you've been hearing about in general. For annual ESOP valuations, it's pretty straightforward. We're working with the company, getting their financials, having a meeting to talk about how the year went, what is the outlook for the business, and those things are pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I think to add to that, on communicating that value, especially if you're going through some rough times, the expectations of the employees, if the company's taking a big hit because of the industry they're in, COVID comes along, communicating that up front just so people are aware, that can impact the bottom line. As we recover from this, we'd expect things to go back to more of a normalized, but it's just staying out in front of that with the communication so everybody's aware and they don't get blindsided with why did my shares decrease by 50% over the last year.
Yeah, I think that goes back to just really, doesn't it, gentlemen, just really kind of go back to the basic understanding of, communication, right? It's about helping people understand how do they get more value. I mean, since this is a retirement plan, most employees are pretty accustomed to buying mutual funds and stocks and whatnot in their 401k, right? And they can see these securities moving kind of based as the market is having its ebb and flow, right? And we're dealing with a privately held company where it's not traded on a ticker symbol that they can look up on their local financial app, right? And kind of see, hey, what's the price today, or how's it done over the last week? And so the valuation is done once a year, and we have to take a look at once a year is like, what are some of the things, right, we can do over the course of this year to increase this the share price, right, Brandon? Have you seen some of that floating around there? It's like, how can we increase this, our 6 or 7 or 8, 10%, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of things that go into the valuation of a private company, and that can be hard for employees or lay persons to follow. And there are so many variables. The business profitability matters, the actual results, but also the forecast matters. So what is the outlook for the business? And then you have balance sheet changes. So if the company is paying down its debt or accumulating cash, those things have impact on the value as well. So there's a lot of moving parts that it wouldn't be easy for somebody just to say, well, we did this, so the value is going up or down by X percentage. There's a lot of things that go into that, and that can be hard to follow or digest, especially when you're only getting to see that. You just get a statement as a participant. You get a statement once a year that says, I have X number of shares at X share price, and here's my account value.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you're correct. It doesn't have as much ebb and flow. Let's go to the next slide, Lisa, please. So it is, I think, it certainly is important for communication. So let's take a look at why people are considering an ESOP plan. Certainly they're tax favored on summer liquidity, which I think both of you gentlemen, mentioned. So it doesn't really matter what the tax code is at the time. Certainly, there are some benefits at any point if you feel like this is a good opportunity for you to really consider an ESOP. ESOPs allow for a low and slow ownership transition, right? So you do have the opportunity to kind of move this along into new ownership. I think both of you gentlemen would agree that having a solid leadership team in place would probably be one of the key factors to consider before diving into an ESOP. Would you both agree with that?
I think it helps to have a
really
solid. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it's essential. Really, you can't have the ESOP and the company aren't going to be set up to succeed if you have an owner that's involved in running the day-to-day and then they just sell the company and retire. Now, in some cases, we have the seller or the owner is not as involved and they already have that leadership team in place and they can retire sooner. But generally, we're going to expect some sort of transition over a period of time where that seller is still involved in the business to make sure that it remains a healthy company and that things don't go downhill. And they don't want that either because typically they're financing a big chunk of the sale too. So they want the company to succeed so they can be sure that they get their full purchase price. But yeah, so having that management team that can run the business once the previous owner is retired is very important.
Awesome. Yeah. Roy, you were going to say, were you mimicking that or?
Yeah, basically the same thing. It depends on where the company's at with the owner. If the owner has some time and can remain engaged, they can fill in parts. It's just transitioning those critical functions to the next person. So when the owner steps out, the company doesn't miss a beat.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important to be able, certainly if we just to spend about 30 seconds on leadership, we have just found that when you have really good leadership inside the business, you don't want to have, whether you're considering an ESOP or not, you want to make sure that the business is not driven by just the owner being there, right? Because then it just kind of dilutes the value of the business itself, puts too much pressure and dependency on that owner, he or she not there, then the business just kind of flounders along through and they're not able to get where they want to go. So I think that's really, really an important part of any business and it's growth. Another point, certainly ESOPs benefit the people who have helped create the value in the company. We've kind of talked about that a little bit, right? Is you're taking more, whether you're in management, ownership, or inside of the company at any level, you're now part of creating real value inside of that business, and you have a real personal stake. Certainly, you benefit from it within your retirement plan, and you can see the value growing. I looked at a statistic here the other day, is that annual growth in sales per employee increased by 2.3% through an ESOP, right? And annual employment growth increased about the same, 2.3%. You know, I'm sure that based on when the studies are done and who's doing it, what they're looking at, but this is going back through 1996. So I think it's really good for those who are in the world of, I would just say, I don't want to say qualify, but really should consider an ESOP, right? I think it's a great thing. Let's go to the next one, Lisa. You know, ESOP companies certainly are tax favored, independent, and sustainable. And then the next one, Lisa.
I think probably the important thing to note on that last one, Vincent, is that if you have 100% employee-owned S corporation, there are no income taxes to the company, both federally and at the state level. So that generates a lot of additional cash flow in the business that initially is used to repay the financing of the transaction. But then it eventually can be used to pay dividends, pay bonuses to employees, because there's no longer a single owner that is taking all that money out through distribution. So it kind of stays within the company and stays within the plan that either increases value or comes out in the form of cash. So that is a big advantage for an ESOP company.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I'm going to push back just a little bit, and not push back is really kind of clarification, right? Because I think what we want to make sure everybody has a good understanding is the company is incorporating some debt to do an ESOP, right? These are not inexpensive transactions. The owners are pulling out some equity, and you can see some of the benefits of having an ESOP inside of your business. Certainly, there's some great legacy benefits there on the last bullet point. But they do incorporate some debt, and there isn't some annual expenses that have to be done, certainly evaluations and other things that have to be done that go through that. But once they get that debt paid off, and the sooner they focus on that, then I think, Brandon, along with your points, and it could happen from the beginning, is you just have to make sure that those can now be used as dividends to increase share price and be paid out. And that, I guess that's kind of where you were going with that, right?
Yep. Yeah, there certainly are costs associated with doing ESOP, but those tax savings are significant. And the other important thing to note is there is no out-of-pocket cost for the employees. They're not buying these shares. They're being allocated them as over time as the plan gets administered and shares get released to the employees.
Yeah, that's great. Roy, can you give a brief explanation to our attendees today as to who is a good candidate for an ESOP? When you take a look at them, if you had to sketch it out in a few bullet points, could you give everybody a general idea of what is a good candidate for an ESOP plan?
As Brandon mentioned, there's certain rules, requirements, cost involved. So one, you have to make sure that you have, primarily you have to have a profitable company. At the core of what you're doing, you're going to take on debt to pull equity out. So you have to be able to generate the revenues to service that debt. From a size standpoint, 25 is kind of the minimum that we see. Sometimes it goes lower. Sometimes you need much more. There's highly compensated rules that come into play. So you have to have a certain number of employees to meet those parameters. Having a good management team to move forward with is important. You want to make sure that the company can continue generating profitable results for the organization. And I think, being able to forecast some of the requirements, some of the planning requirements that you have to do moving forward, you really need to make sure that you can plan and execute that plan for the organization. Legacy standpoint, if there's no family members that are in the business or able to take the business moving forward, this is a great way to retain that company. So if you're in a rural area or urban area, but rural area, so you can really have a big impact by retaining that company locally and being something to the community, maintaining the community. So I think those are some of the overall factors that we look at.
Yeah, I think those are some great points. And there are some feasibility studies out there, I think, right, gentlemen, that companies can do to see, hey, look let's see if we're actually even a candidate for an ESOP. These aren't things that you make in, these are decisions you're not going to make in 30 days. These take probably a few years to really get through the full cycle and get it implemented when you talk about going through feasibility studies and whatnot. But certainly there's some opportunities to kind of explore some things to see, hey, is this a good thing that we can have, and how would it work for our business? So Lisa, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the information about how well is an ESOP employee ownership plan working over time. So since 1974, I'll give everybody a chance to kind of read through those. I thought that was kind of interesting on the growth of where ESOPs are. Certainly 1,600 companies nationwide to now over 8,100 companies. So I think that, certainly there has been some popularity in these, and there's a lot of articles out there about them. Certainly the number of employees owning stock, and certainly how do they work, and certainly how do we judge any of their performances, right? So you're going to still have some of the same key performance indicators inside of a business as you would if it's an ESOP, but I think what you do have is you can also have a little bit heightened awareness from top to bottom as to how to build value in the company. Let's go to the next set here, Lisa. And we've got a few more on the other side, right? During the 5 years of ESOPs were instituted, annual employment growth was up about 5.5%, a little over 5%. Sales growth of ESOPs were about almost 5.5% faster, and 73% of ESOP companies in samples significantly improved performance. So I think there are some benefits if you're in that market and you feel like it's a good way to go. I think to Roy's point is you certainly want to have a profitable company. Certainly, having a great strategic plan in there. How are we doing that? And in kind of knowing where we're going, certainly great leadership are a couple of the factors that you need to have to kind of move one of these things forward. So, gentlemen, tell me a little bit. I mean, Roy, you're out talking to a lot of business owners. Brandon, you're working with business owners on a valuation perspective. Roy, do you have anything to share with the group here today that talks a little bit about some of the pitfalls that business owners or businesses can get into if they go into an ESOP for the wrong reasons?
Well, I think we've seen as I mentioned, Department of Labor, if somebody's trying to maximize value and really pushing the limit, especially going back to the Great Recession, we saw the Department of Labor stepped up their efforts after the Great Recession and came in and really squelched some deals because people really pushed the limits, maybe went beyond the limits of what they should have done for fair market value. The owner was perhaps still remaining as trustee, making decisions where there was a conflict of interest. So that was pushed back heavily. I think, as well, if you're looking at trying to, if you're trying to get the most dollars out and you have something, like a strategic buyer, it's going to be really hard to compete with that strategic buyer because they can pay, more higher multiples than, a fair market value. So that's going to be a challenge if you try to push the limit on that side. I think those are some of the primary things, are really the conflicts that can come into play if, again, you're trying to get very top dollar and extending yourself beyond the rules.
Yeah. Brandon, what have you guys seen on the valuation side? Because you guys work with the, certainly what's going on in updating these valuations every year for the trustees. Any challenges that you have seen on your end from the valuation side with ESOPs that you would like to share with the group?
Yeah, I think some of it, and it adds on to the point that Roy's making. If you try to push the value too much for the initial transaction, and these are leveraged transactions, right? So effectively, if you've got a $10 million enterprise value business, they're borrowing $10 million to finance that purchase price. If there's any decline in the company's performance, which decreases the enterprise value, all of a sudden you're running into an issue where you could be underwater from an equity value standpoint. So you've got to be cautious to not push that value too much. The other thing that I saw somebody ask a question about challenges with implementation of ESOPs. And I think it is important to have the right team of advisors involved in doing that implementation and the initial formation of the ESOP, the sale to the ESOP. Because if you don't have people that know what they're doing, you're going to run into challenges. One, getting the deal closed initially, but then two, with the administration going forward. So you want to be looking at those things up front and ahead of time. And you mentioned feasibility, Vincent. There are firms that do feasibility studies for companies considering ESOPs. So it is important to talk with the right people when you're considering it, and then make sure you have the right team when you decide that it is the path that you want to go down.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier in our conversation, certainly, is that these are not for everybody. They are not inexpensive transactions. They take time, but they can be beneficial to a business, to an owner, to its family for legacy, certainly to the employees, and certainly even to the community when you consider it as a legacy. I think, Roy, was your point, is certainly if you have a business that's in a rural area and you want to keep that business in that rural area, and keep things moving and not just sell it to a third party that could pick it up and move it somewhere else, is that this could be one of the things that you do to help kind of maintain and keep it there, right? There's other steps that would have to be done along with that, but this could be one of the components, to not only attract and keep people inside of your business and help to build that company in the community, but also to keep the business in that area, along with some of the other things that are out there. Roy, you both are out in the marketplace a little bit. Could you share with the group today what you kind of see as a forecast for ESOPs, say over the next 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5, whichever you want to address?
Probably the easiest thing in my job to assess is I work with a lot of ESOP professionals. And ESOP professionals don't have the time of day to talk to you. They'll talk to you, but they don't have the time of day to talk to you. Often the question is, okay, we've got the end of the year coming up. Is it, going to happen? Are things going to slow down? And nobody sees a slowdown. We've got the aging baby boomers. People are starting to retire. There's more interest. So we're in a peak demand that's going to happen, well into next year, and who knows where beyond that. So there's going to be a lot of activity of people looking at the ESOP. In fact, if you're considering an ESOP this year, and you're just starting that process, it would be a big stretch to think you're going to get that across the finish line unless everything aligns perfectly, and somebody's deal falls through. It's just not going to happen. A lot of the trustees who are involved in these, they really fill that position for the employees, the trustees. I've heard from at least a half dozen trustees are no longer taking deals, and the business professionals are there. I just talked to somebody last week who said, I set my annual record back in July, and I think I'm going to do more between August and December. So I'm going to double my annual record. So it's a busy time.
Yeah, I would imagine. I would suspect, Brandon, for you guys on the valuation side, it's also pretty busy also, right?
Yeah, certainly. As Roy mentioned, we're going to do more new ESOP transactions this year than we ever have, and we don't see any slowdown. I think there's a growing interest in ESOPs. The benefits and advantages are there. As you said, Vincent, it's not for everybody, but for the people are starting to. I think there have been some stigmas historically with ESOPs, and I think those are kind of going away with a lot of success stories out there. So we're seeing, just through word of mouth, ESOPs are gaining in popularity and interest. The tax changes, as we've discussed, coming make ESOPs an attractive option. So we don't see any slowdown in the next several years.
Yeah, go ahead, Roy. Go ahead.
I was going to add on to that. We have everything that's going in the marketplace with retirements, transitions, and then at least I'm running a lot more inquiries, conversation around. It's an employee retention tool. So there's a lot of interest in, I think Brandon mentioned right up front, how do we retain these employees? It gives us a competitive advantage. So I think we're going to see more companies look at the ESOP or any, ownership, any ways to share ownership with the employees as a way to retain employees. And we're just in a labor market that's going to demand that. So that's just going to be more pressure on, the ESOP community. So I think it'll really grow here in the next few years.
And a lot of these businesses, they don't, sorry, Vincent, I'm just going to say these business owners, they don't want to sell to private equity or a competitor. They want that legacy to continue. They want the business to continue running it the way that it has been for a long time. So an ESOP is an attractive option from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, I would agree that I think those are all great points. When you take a look at just the overall market, it doesn't change that much from year to year. Certainly baby boomers still own over 60% of all privately held businesses today. And the amount of those business owners that will be exiting out of their businesses, say over the next 7 to 10 years plus, right, are going to just continue to increase. And having an opportunity for them to pull the equity out of their business for themselves and their families is always a great way. Certainly a sale can, or a sale to private equity doesn't happen as frequently as most people think. It's a pretty hard transaction. It's not always what people make it out to be. It sounds sexy once in a while. Hey, this would be great to sell to a private equity firm, but there's a lot of steps and things that hoops you have to go through to really make that happen for any sale, which is why only 20% of them are successful, right? And so, out of 10 companies, only 2 of them are going to sell. And then the other 8 are going to either have to kind of build up things to make themselves a little bit more attractive and transferable, or they're just going to have to do some type of a organized dissolution with the company to pull that equity out. So, it's always a challenge, especially when you take a look at some of the other numbers about how much money business owners on average across the country have not saved. I've talked to many wealth managers, and I think some of the statistics are across the country that the average business owner has saved up a little over $500,000 in investable assets. And so the dependency for the owner, to get that equity out is going to be pretty high. So a couple of questions we have here that I want to kind of go through are there measures of the company agility following ESOP transactions? Roy or Brandon, you want to tackle that question?
Can he clarify what he means by agility?
Yeah. Dan, you want to clarify what you mean by agility?
It's just a time of a lot of change. And I'm finding that companies need to pivot. And there are big transactions where people feel that a very focused private ownership can react more quickly. But I don't know that. I'm just asking if there's any measures of how easily an ESOP-owned company can frequently pivot and adopt a new model.
I think
I wouldn't say that there's any restraints by being an ESOP company. Like I said, there is going to be a management team that's leading the business. So to the extent that I think they see an opportunity to pivot or change direction, it's not like they need to gather all the employees and get a unanimous vote or a majority vote. The company is still led by managers, president, CEO. And so I wouldn't see any difference by being an ESOP company as far as that's concerned.
I think the limiting factor would be when in this ESOP cycle and how much debt they take on. If they push the limit, there's always the factor of taking on additional debt to buy out the equity. So if they push the limit, they maximize the debt. It gives them less flexibility, moving forward. They have to retire some debt before they might be able to take advantage of opportunities. On the other side, as Brandon mentioned, we see a lot of S Corp, 100% S Corp ESOPs. They don't pay taxes. They're sitting on a lot of cash. They're very flexible, depending on where they are in their cycle. Have great opportunities to go out and invest in other opportunities to diversify their portfolio if they'd like to go into new areas. So, it does depend a bit on where they are in that cycle, maturity of the ESOP.
Yeah. So you guys mentioned a lot on the S corporation for the ESOP. Talk a little bit about the C corp structure with an ESOP, the viability of it. Is it possible, and how is that viewed?
Yeah, there's really no reason to be, unless it's part of the initial 1042 deferral period where the company does need to be a C corp. But essentially what you get is the company is able to wipe out a lot of that income through, one, interest expense on the debt, and then two, through compensation expense or contributions to the ESOP itself. So that is a tax deductible expense. And so effectively an ESOP company, even if it is a C corp, can eliminate a lot of its taxable income.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Roy?
I think as we look through it, oftentimes they're a C corp, take advantage of 1042. They have that 5-year wait period. They get through that process and then they flip to an S corp and move forward. If they're 100%, they flip to the S corp to move forward. I guess the other issue would be where you don't have a long-term objective for the company to be 100% owned by the employees. You may have some family members involved. Then we see some C corp structures in there to maintain that. But they're very viable, as Brandon said. You can effectively eliminate a lot of that tax ramifications early on through the contributions, and be successful in driving that organization forward.
Awesome. Thank you. So a question we have here from our audience is there a level of buy-in that's required from the employees to make shifting to an ESOP a viable consideration? Roy,
do you have anything? I would say a lot of times the companies we're working with, they're not consulting the employees. They don't announce this to the employees until the sale is completed. Some do ahead of time. That can be risky because if the deal doesn't go through for some reason, it kind of creates some uncertainty and frenzy within the employee base. But Roy, I don't know if you have anything on
I think
buy-in.
Yeah, I think, if we're talking monetary, no, they're not writing checks to join. The second piece, though, is the buy-in of the ESOP structure. It really depends on how the company has been operated in the past. If you have a very, cohesive group management and, across board, everybody's working together, there's a lot of communication, it's much easier to move forward. If you have more of a command and control structure, and then you're handing it off to everybody, it's like, yeah, what's this guy selling me? Oh yeah, he's giving me the company. What's he really selling me, or what's he saddling me with? So, I think as long as if you had a good working relationship, good communication going into it, it's going to improve the buy-in. There's always going to be, some in that group who don't care, unfortunately. Regardless, there's enough people in that population. But the more communication, the more engagement prior to the ESOP, the smoother that transition will happen.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we don't see a lot of people say, oh, we're an ESOP company now, I don't want to work here. We probably see more indifference than opposition. People that just don't get it, or like Roy said, they just don't care. But we don't see a lot of people who are opposed to it.
Yeah. And I guess the timing is always, you certainly want to include people in it, but there are certain things along the way where owners and upper management can kind of be working with any feasibility studies or any of those processes that are going through to kind of get them maybe that 80-90% level, and then they can kind of move on from there. So a question we have from our audience is, are there certain industries that are a little bit more attracted to an ESOP than other industries that you gentlemen have seen in your time? Or
I think there's concentrations out there that we see. Construction, trucking seems to be a very big right now, especially talking about retaining employees. Manufacturing, there's a good smattering across the board, some professional firms. I think if you have a company that has successfully, a well-known company, well-run company that's been successful with an ESOP in industry, a lot of people point to that company and say, hey, we can be like them. And for Brandon, I miss probably the obvious one. A lot of breweries are ESOPs, so he's a fan of those if you didn't know him. So they can serve any industry. It just the more solid examples that we can pass along, the easier it is for somebody to see themselves. They're in that industry. Hey, it worked for them. Why can't it work for me? And they start investigating.
Yeah. It's Brandon is not in a niche market of breweries to make sure they taste the hops. I assume, right, Brandon?
A lot of sampling.
That is interesting. You bring it up just as kind of an off deal, is like, because that is a growing and has been a growing industry, especially here in the state of Michigan, and I know it has been across the country in certain states more than others, but that's just another new industry that is out there and just kind of really blossomed out with some really good businesses. You've got founders over there on the west side of the state, and many other ones in the state of Michigan that are there. We've got just a few more minutes, so if anybody else has any additional questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, as we certainly would like to make sure that we're addressing all the questions. Or if you have questions to ask our panelists, that would be kind of great to go through. Gentlemen, as we kind of go through and kind of wrap up here, what would be some of the thoughts that you would want to leave with any business owners as to what do they need to think about before even really considering an ESOP, or to say, hey, I think we might be a candidate? What would be some of the things that you would ask them to think through, before kind of proceeding and going down that runway?
I think probably the first thing is to consider, their timeline. Where do they see themselves? When do they see themselves exiting the company? They need to start planning for this. And as they're looking at that, it's okay, who are my potential buyers? What sort of goals do I have? Do these potential buyers, fit into my goals? If we're talking private equity, I think we all have seen cases where companies have sold to private equity and then everything has been shut down, and that owner is just very disappointed. They no longer have the business. They have a lot of cash, but they don't have the business, and their identity is gone, and they want to see that going forward. So it's really starting to look out in the future. What do you want your future to look like? What do you want the future for the stakeholders in the company to look like? Does an ESOP fit that, or does employee ownership kind of fit that vision? And then, contacting people and start gathering information to analyze it for yourself and bring the right people in.
Yeah. Have you guys, real quick, seen any anticipated changes with ESOP tax laws, with the new tax law pending? Is any of that part of that, as far as you know?
There's nothing that I'm aware of that would be direct impact to an ESOP company.
Yeah, and fortunately, ESOPs share support from both sides of the aisle. So I think that that's a positive thing for the ESOP community.
Yeah, it's always important, because you never know when Washington is going to change the tax code. Are there some benefits or non-benefits for certain environments, right? So it's always good to check. One last question we have: are there any issues with cannabis or marijuana companies, since it's still federally illegal?
I haven't seen any yet, but I suspect that might be a challenge currently. Yeah,
potentially, right? Right. Yeah, it could be. Might need a few more, might need a little bit longer runway on that one before they really get anywhere. And
Well,
kind
we
of see how
certainly
that
know they
plays.
can't get bank financing, right? So,
That is
although
correct.
I think we do have one bank locally that is doing some, but so that'd have to be a seller finance transaction for sure.
Yeah.
But
So
I don't know
somebody
what the
have to be
Department of
pretty.
Labor's view on it is.
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time. We're at the end of our point where I'd like to keep everybody at about an hour, and really appreciate both of you being here today and kind of going through some questions and discussions, about this topic, and really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. Also want to thank, excuse me, the attendees for being here today. If you would like to get any additional information, certainly you can email us at the email here on the last slide here. We'd be happy to get that information over to any of the panelists, and you can have a conversation with them. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion today, we do record this event, so it will be up on our Prometis Partners YouTube channel within the next 48 hours. So if you would like to view the video parts of it or whatnot, or share it, you'd be happy. You can go on there and you can check it out. It will be available. So we'd like for you to, again, put down for your calendar for next month's event. We're going to have Hillary Dolby talking about financial strategies and the importance of those to business owners and moving forward. So we are going to be changing our time starting in November because we have a fair amount of owners and people that are logging in from Central Time and further west, even as far west as California. So we're going to move to a 12 noon time starting in November so that we can accommodate our other viewers on this channel. So again, we appreciate everybody being here. Hopefully you've got some good information out of it. If you would like some additional information, please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us. And I hope all of you have a great day and an awesome week. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you.